Your English Bible says seek. The Hebrew author wrote Darash. Those are not the same thing. One is a glance. The other is a path worn into the ground by someone who refused to stop coming back. And once you see what Darash actually means, you will never read Seek the Lord the same way again. Because what you thought was a simple invitation to look for God turns out to be a description of something far more physical, far more exhausting, and far more honest about what it actually costs to find what you are looking for. You are reading a translation of a translation, and somewhere in that process, a word that carried the weight of trampled earth got swapped out for a word that fits on a bumper sticker. A word with the texture of broken soil became a word you can say in passing without breaking a sweat. Let's go back to the original. Picture a hillside somewhere in ancient Canaan. No paved road, no cleared trail, just dense brush, thorns, uneven rock, and one person, not with a map, not with a shortcut, pushing through the same undergrowth, the same way, day after day. Not because they found what they were looking for yesterday, but because they have decided that they will keep going back to this same place, over and over, until the ground itself remembers them, until the earth finally yields a path. Not because the path was there waiting, but because someone walked it enough times to make it real. That is Darash. That physical image, the body repeating a route until the route becomes permanent, is the literal base from which this word grew. And you need to feel it in your legs before we talk about what God is actually asking when he says, "Seek me." The word appears 164 times in the Hebrew Bible. 164 times. And for the vast majority of those appearances, your English translation says something like seek, or inquire, or search. The translations are not wrong exactly, but they are thin. They are the surface of a word that has a much deeper root. And that root is physical, embodied, and demanding in a way that seek simply refuses to be. Strong's Concordance gives you the proper definition first. Darash is, in the original, to tread or frequent a place. The theological meaning, to seek, to inquire, is secondary to the physical one. It is a derived meaning, built on top of a more primitive image. Gesenius, the foundational Hebrew lexicon that scholars have used for 2 centuries, says that the earliest detectable sense of the root is to tread a place with the feet, to go to a place, to frequent it, to keep going back until the going back is the thing that defines you. The Brown Driver Briggs Hebrew and English lexicon gives it as properly to tread or frequent, usually to follow for pursuit or search, by implication to seek or ask. The movement goes from the physical to the spiritual, not the other way around. The concept of seeking is built on top of a concept of walking, of trampling, of returning so many times to the same place that the ground has no choice but to form a path. The Hebrew scholar E. Klein traces the base of Darash to an original meaning of to tread, trample, rub, noting its close kinship with the related Hebrew root daras, which explicitly means to trample with the feet, and with the Arabic cognate darasa, meaning to rub, to thresh, to learn by repeated effort. The Syriac version of the root carries the same meaning, to tread or beat a path. And here is a detail that should stop you cold. The word that eventually becomes the English word study, through the Latin studium, from studere, meaning to press forward, to be diligent, to push toward a thing, follows exactly the same conceptual journey. A word about physical pressing forward becoming a word about mental pursuit. The ancient world understood something we have largely forgotten, that real seeking is indistinguishable from repeated physical effort. You do not think your way to a destination, you walk your way there, and then you walk back, and then you walk there again. There is also the Hebrew verb darach, to tread or trample grapes in the winepress, to tread out the harvest, to press down on one's enemies the way feet press on soil, which belongs to the same linguistic family. These are not gentle, passive, sitting still words. These are words built from the image of feet pressing down on earth, changing it, marking it permanently with the evidence that someone was here and someone came back. And yet every Sunday, somewhere in the world, someone tells a congregation to seek the Lord. And what the assembled minds hear, filtered through centuries of English and the comfort of modernity, is something like, take a quiet moment to think about God. Maybe say a prayer. Make a mental note that you should feel more spiritually connected sometime before the weekend is over. Darash is not available to comment on this interpretation. But if it were, it would say, that is not a path. That is a thought about a path. and a thought about a path does not get you anywhere. There is, importantly, another Hebrew verb for seeking, baqash, and the two words appear together frequently enough that the distinction matters. Baqash is the seeking that reaches for something specific, that stretches toward a particular object. It is the searching of someone who wants to take hold. Darash is different. Darash is the seeking built out of repeated orientation, returning, frequenting, coming back to the same place until that place is where you belong. Both verbs appear in Ezekiel 34, where God speaks as a shepherd. I will darash my flock, and I will baqash them out. The two movements are distinct. One is the orientation, the frequenting, the returning. The other is the closing of distance at the end of the search. Darash builds the path. Baqash closes the gap at the end of it. Darash does not mean try to find God. Darash means go back, and then go back again, and then go back again after that, until the going back itself is the evidence of what you want. Now let's watch what happens when you bring this word into the actual text, because this is where the whole landscape of the Bible shifts. In Amos 5:4, the prophet delivers one of the most compressed and powerful lines in the entire Hebrew Bible. The Lord is speaking through Amos to a people who had not stopped performing religious rituals. They were still going to Bethel, still going to Gilgal, still making pilgrimage to Beersheba, but something had gone dead in the center of what they were doing. The form of devotion was intact. The frequency of the rituals was intact, but the actual darashing, the return to the source rather than the return to the sanctuary, had stopped. God responds to that deadness with a single command. In Hebrew, it is two words, dirshuni v'chayu, dirshuni v'chayu, darash me and live. I want you to hear that verb in its full physical weight, dirshuni, the command form of darash, addressed in the second person plural to a whole nation. It is not a request. It is not a suggestion dressed in polite clothing. It is a command, and it carries the full force of the treading image. Beat a path to me. Come back until the ground knows your feet. Wear out the journey. Go through the overgrowth. Go through the dark season. Go through the dry year when prayer feels like speaking into a wall. And come back again. Come back again. Come back again. And live. Two words. No comfort, no explanation, no shortcut offered. Just do this thing, this hard, repeating, path-making thing, and you will be alive. That is what God was saying to a people who were going through the motions of religion, but had stopped actually coming back to the source. They had not quit the religious calendar. They had quit the verb. The same verb appears in Deuteronomy 4:29, where Moses gives what amounts to a prophecy and a promise to the generation that would eventually go into exile. He tells them, if from there you darash the Lord your God, you will find him, if you darash him with all your heart and with all your soul. Notice what Moses does not say. He does not say, if you feel drawn toward God, if you have a sincere disposition toward the divine, if you consider yourself a spiritually seeking kind of person. He says, if you do this particular verb, this tread and frequent and keep going back verb, with your whole heart and your whole soul, then you will find him. The finding is conditional on the doing. The arrival depends on the returning. You do not find the path by standing where you are and believing very sincerely that a path exists somewhere. You find it by walking it enough times that it becomes permanent underfoot. And the promise Moses gives is remarkable when you hold it against its context. He is speaking to people who are about to lose everything. The land, the temple, the structures of daily worship, the visible signs of covenant relationship, all of it is going to be stripped away. And Moses' answer to that approaching catastrophe is not, trust in the theological proposition that God is with you. His answer is, do the verb, even in exile, even with no temple, even with no pilgrimage road. Darash, keep going back, because the path does not require the infrastructure. The path requires only your feet. Then Psalm 34:10. David writes this psalm after a dangerous episode where his life was under genuine threat, having feigned madness before a foreign king to survive. His testimony in the psalm is both personal and categorical. In verse 4, he writes, I dareshed the Lord, and he answered me, and delivered me from all my fears. And then in verse 10, he moves from the personal testimony to a declaration about a whole category of people. Dorshei Adonai, those who habitually darash the Lord, those who make a practice of this, they shall not lack any good thing. Look at the Hebrew participle, dorshei. It is active. It is ongoing. It describes not a mood, but a practice. Not a feeling of spiritual yearning, but a category of repeated action. The dorshei are those for whom going back has become as instinctive as breathing, because they have done it enough times that the path is already grooved into the earth. Consider also Psalm 27:4, one of the most quoted verses in the Psalter. David writes, One thing I ask of the Lord, this only do I seek. The Hebrew verb there is baqash, the reaching for verb, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze on the beauty of the Lord and to darash in his temple. That final verb is often rendered seek him or inquire in his temple, but the original uses darash. What David is describing is not a one-time pilgrimage to the sanctuary. He is describing what he wants the whole architecture of his life to look like, a permanent, habitual, repeated return to the presence of God. The asking is baqash, a specific desire, stated once. The living is darash, the return that never stops. He is saying, the single thing I want is to make the going back so regular, so constant, so worn into my existence, that the house of God is the place where my feet expect to be. And when David, near the end of his life, passes the commission to build the temple to his son Solomon in 1 Chronicles 28:9, the charge he gives is built entirely on Darash. Know the God of your father, and serve him with a whole heart and a willing mind. For the Lord searches all hearts, and understands every intention of the thoughts. If you darash him, he will be found by you, but if you forsake him, he will cast you off forever. This is a father speaking to his son about the most important thing he knows after a lifetime of faith. And the most important thing David knows is not a doctrine, it is a verb. Do the verb. Keep doing the verb. The finding follows the doing. And the abandonment that ends in being cast off is not necessarily a dramatic rebellion. It is, more quietly and more commonly, a stopping of the verb, a path not walked, a return not made, an overgrowth slowly reclaiming what used to be clear. And then Isaiah 55:6, which may be the most urgent darash in the entire Old Testament. The prophet issues what sounds like a time-limited invitation. Darash the Lord while he may be found. Call upon him while he is near. Now you could read that line sentimentally, a gentle encouragement to lean into your spiritual feelings while you happen to be in a receptive season. But the word darash crashes into that reading with all its physical weight. The urgency is not an appeal to a feeling. It is a command to a body. Get moving. Go back. Tread that ground again. There is a window and it is open, and you need to be putting your feet to the path right now. Not later, not when the children are grown and the schedule clears. Now. These were not instructions delivered into comfortable silence. When Isaiah wrote these words, the northern kingdom had already fallen to Assyria. The horizon of destruction for the south was visible to anyone paying attention. Isaiah was not speaking to people who had too much comfort. He was speaking to people who were about to watch everything they knew come apart. And the word he chooses is darash. Tread the path. Frequent the presence. Come back to God so many times that even exile cannot erase the muscle memory of return. Because paths, when untrodden for long enough, grow back over. The brush returns. The rocks roll back. And a God unpursued can feel, from inside exile, very far away. Not because he moved, but because the path back to him became unfamiliar. Now here is where the honest turn matters, and this is the part that most word studies refuse to do, because it complicates the beautiful picture, and beautiful pictures get more views. The etymology of darash is not as settled as some teachers make it sound. The Balashon Hebrew Language Dictionary, which offers one of the more careful etymological analyses of this word, surveyed 6 major Hebrew dictionaries and found that scholars do not fully agree on which meaning came first in the historical development of the word. Some lexicons list the judicial sense, inquiring, investigating, as the primary meaning. Others list the treading and frequenting sense as the deeper root. The scholar Wagner actually reverses the argument of Gesenius and Klein and suggests that the treading and trampling sense may have developed not as the origin of darash, but as a later borrowing from the related daras. And it is true, as Balashon notes carefully, that darash never appears in the biblical text in the pure physical sense of simply to tread alone. It always carries the intellectual and spiritual sense of seeking, inquiring, or investigating alongside the physical image. So what does this mean? It means we should hold this word with precision. The tread and frequent image is a legitimate scholar-attested picture of the conceptual background of darash, affirmed by Gesenius, present in BDB, echoed in the Syriac and Arabic cognates, and taken seriously by scholars across generations. But it is a background picture, not a mechanical definition you can pour uniformly into every verse. What the root gives us is not a translation rule. What it gives us is a texture, an insistence that the seeking commanded and described in these verses is habitual, directional, and repeated, in the way that wearing out a path is habitual and repeated. And that is exactly what what seek cannot carry. Not because seek is a bad word, but because it is a word that allows you to imagine the action as a single event with no required recurrence. Darash does not permit that reading. Darash has frequency embedded in its skeleton no matter where you stand on the etymological debate. This is also where the word connects to something you may never have recognized as related. The entire tradition of Midrash, the rabbinic genre of biblical interpretation that gave the Jewish world thousands of years of commentary, story, argument, and rereading, takes its name directly from Darash. A Midrash is the product of darashing a text, going over the same passage again and again, returning to the same verse in different decades with different life pressing on your shoulders, pressing the text the way feet press soil, until the text gives up something it was not willing to give on the first pass, or the 10th pass, or the 20th. And the rabbis who built that tradition understood something nearly invisible to modern readers. To study the Torah deeply and to seek God were not two different departments of the religious life. They were the same activity understood from two angles. You cannot genuinely darash the text without darashing the author. And you cannot genuinely darash God without learning to press into the words he left. This might be the most quietly subversive thing Darash has to say to 21st century Christianity. The idea that Bible study and prayer are separate departments, one for the intellectually inclined, one for the emotionally available, is a division the Hebrew mind would find genuinely puzzling. In Ezra 7:10, when Ezra sets his heart to darash the law of the Lord, and to do it, and to teach it, that sequence is not accidental. Darash comes before practice. Practice comes before teaching. Because you cannot give away a path you have not worn yourself. And the wearing cannot be outsourced, borrowed, or inherited. You have to put your own feet on it. Now let's bring the most famous verse on seeking into focus. Matthew 7:7. Ask and it will be given. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be opened, is a Greek text. But Jesus was a Hebrew teacher formed entirely by the Hebrew scriptures. And when his audience heard the Greek word zetaite, seek, they were carrying centuries of darash in their linguistic bones. Notice what the Greek verb is doing. It is present imperative active, not seek once, keep seeking. The ongoing present tense is not a grammatical accident. It is the Greek straining to carry the darash impulse into a new language. Keep asking, keep knocking, keep treading back to this door. The finding follows the frequency, not as a reward for religious persistence, but because persistent returning is simply what making a path means. The path does not exist before you walk it, and you cannot walk it once and call it a path. There is also the question of what you are building the path toward. Because one of the things Darash makes visible is that you cannot separate the destination from the practice of returning to it. If you keep going back to your work, darashing it, frequenting it with your best hours and your deepest focus, that is what you will find at the center of your life. If you keep going back to a relationship, darashing that person with your attention and your time and your patience, that relationship will be there, worn into the landscape of who you are. The word does not only apply to God. It describes a principle of how human beings are actually formed. You become what you keep going back to. The path you wear is the path that will feel natural when you stop choosing deliberately, when the habit takes over and the feet just go. The prophets were not naive about this. They understood that Israel was not going back to nothing when they stopped darashing God. They were going back to the Baals, to the high places, to the gods of the nations around them. They were darashing something, just not the Lord. And the path to those altars was getting worn, while the path to the one who called them by name was growing over. This is what made the prophets' urgency so sharp. It was not that Israel had become indifferent to all spiritual seeking. It was that they were darashing the wrong things with enough consistency that those paths were starting to feel more natural than the path home. And this is the question that Darash leaves on the table for you and me. Not do you believe in seeking God? Not do you have a theology of prayer and spiritual pursuit? But what are you actually going back to? Where are your feet actually wearing a groove? The path you are building right now, with your hours, your attention, your returning, your habitual orientation, where does it lead? When you tell yourself you are seeking God, what does the evidence look like? Not in your feelings about God, not in your theological position on the importance of seeking, in your actual week. If you trace backward through the last 7 days and look for the worn groove, the repeated return, the going back when you did not feel like it, the choosing of that direction on an ordinary Wednesday when other directions were easier, what do you find? Because Darash is not interested in your theology about seeking. Darash is the verb that measures the path, not the philosophy about the path. You can have a very sophisticated understanding of the importance of pursuing God, and still, when you look honestly at your week, discover that you have not gone back. Not once. not in the ordinary, no crisis, no inspiration kind of way that Darash describes. And here is what makes this harder to sit with than most word studies allow. The people in Amos's time were not atheists. They were not irreligious people who had decided God didn't exist. They were still doing the pilgrimages. They were still observing the calendar. They could have defined seeking God for you in perfectly acceptable religious language. And God still had to send a prophet to say, "You have stopped doing the verb. You are performing religion. You are not beating the path. These are not the same thing." And the aliveness, the vicheyu, depends on the difference. That stings if you have been in church your whole life and you can describe what seeking God means in articulate sentences. And the honest answer, when you look at your actual days, is that the path has not been walked. The ground is not worn. The route is not instinctive. The last time you genuinely turned in that direction without being prompted by a crisis or a Sunday service was longer ago than you want to admit. Darash does not condemn you for that. It describes it. And in describing it, it points back to what is possible. Not a dramatic spiritual event, not a transformation that happens in a weekend, but the beginning of a practice. One return made today, made again tomorrow, made again the day after that. Not because you feel the path drawing you forward, but because you have decided that this is where your feet are going to go every day until the going back is as natural as anything else you do. Micah 6:8 uses Darash for what God requires of human beings. The word require there is Darash. What does the Lord darash of you but to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God? The verb carries the full weight of the judicial sense, to examine, to investigate, to follow the evidence of what is right without letting yourself off the hook. And what God is darashing from you is the same stubborn, returning quality that He is inviting you to bring to Him. Come back to what is just. Come back to what is kind. Come back to humility before the living God. Not once. Keep coming back. Tread it until it is second nature. What does that path look like in your life today? Not on a retreat, not in the season when you are most spiritually alive, in your ordinary week with your ordinary competing demands and your ordinary resistance. Where is the worn groove that points back toward God when everything else is pulling you sideways? If there isn't one yet, this is not a rebuke. This is a description of what you are being invited to build. One step taken, repeated tomorrow, made again the day after, until eventually the path is there and you walk it without having to decide, because you have walked it so many times that the earth remembers your feet. Drop a comment. Tell me honestly, is there a path, or is there the memory of a path you used to walk? Because that is the exact conversation these texts were written for. And this channel exists for that honest reckoning, not the polished version. If this word opens something in how you read the Hebrew text, subscribe, because the word we are going to examine next is the word that appears most often alongside Darash in the scriptures. It is the word matzah, matzah. Your translation says find, but what matzah actually describes is less like locating a lost object and more like an encounter that arrives, something that meets you on the path rather than waiting at a fixed destination. And when you set Darash next to matzah, what you get is not a spiritual transaction. What you get is the oldest love story in the world, written in dirt. Wear out the path. It already knows where it goes.